Hello everybody, this is a video about the history of Yates Cider Mill in Rochester Hills, Michigan. I will be also adding in this video some of my photography from Yates Cider Mill. Our mill's founder, William Henry Yates, had a long family history in the United States with lineage that stretched back to the 17th century Dutch settlers of colonial New York. His wife, Scholastica Caroline Hamer, who was called Caroline, was born in Wittenberg, Germany, and came to the U.S. in 1852 when she was about 17 years old. Caroline entered the U.S. through the port of New York. How she met William is unknown, but the two must have been married sometime in 1853 or early 1854, as their son, Frank William Yates, was born in December 1854. The couple lived in the town of Sullivan in Madison County, New York, where William Yates's parents and siblings also lived at the time, according to census records. William was farming with his brother George, and some of Caroline's younger siblings had come from Wittenberg to live with the family. The Yates family home in Sullivan was on the Erie Canal, meaning that they had access to a water route when they decided to move westward to Michigan. It would have been possible for the family to travel the canal to Lake Erie, and from there to travel up the Detroit River. William and Caroline settled in Avon Township in 1863. Their son Frank was 9 years old at the time that his parents made the move to Michigan. Caroline's sister, Teresa Hamer, also came to Michigan with the family. Teresa never married and lived with the Yates family until her death in 1932. When the Yates family arrived in Avon, they weren't surrounded by strangers. William's uncle John Sipperly already lived here. John Sipperly was the brother of William's mother, Catherine Sipperly Yates, and he sold William and Caroline the land upon which they would build their home and mill. Several of John's children owned farms in the immediate area. So although he was living in a new place, William Yates was surrounded by cousins, and his mill probably had some built-in business. William and Caroline Yates had only one child, Frank. But the Yates family in Avon continued to grow through the succeeding generations. Frank and his wife Maggie had 4 children: Adam, sometimes called Addie, Sadie, Harry, and William. Harry and William helped their father run the mill, and Harry eventually took over the business as the 3rd generation to run William Yates's mill. Sadie married and had a family in Shelby Township, while Adam Yates ran a successful machine shop on Main Street in Rochester, near the South Hill Bridge. The Yates name is still visible on the building today. 9 years after William Yates and his family settled on the Clinton River and started a milling business, something big happened to change the course of history for Rochester area. The Detroit and Bay City Railway planned a route through Avon Township and Rochester, connecting the community to the outside world by rail for the first time. The arrival of the railroad was a game changer for Avon's farmers. It meant that they would have cheaper and better freight options for shipping crops to market. And it also meant more timely access to news and the ability to send and receive telegrams without traveling to Pontiac. Avon's farmers were in favor of the railroad line, and when railroad officials approached them for right-of-way to lay tracks across their land, the property owners granted it. The Yates family, however, did something special. They included a business savvy clause in the deed to their land and would put them on the map for years to come. To comply with the agreement, the D&BC Railway created a flag stop on its line known as Yates Station. It appeared on the railroad line's maps and schedules for decades thereafter. Now William Yates could ship freight from his doorstep without having to make a trip to the depot in Rochester, a great advantage for his milling business. The Michigan Central Railroad took over the D&BC Railway in 1881 at some point. The MCRR decided that it didn't really need to operate a flag station at Yates. since it was only about 2 miles away from the depot in downtown Rochester. But when the railroad announced that it would discontinue the flag stop, William Yates reminded company officials that the provision in the deed could deny them right of way to Yates land, and Yates Station remained in operation. The railroad line was discontinued in 1776, but when you visit us today, you can still enjoy a leisurely nature walk along the former railroad bed and imagine a train pulling into Yates Station. Have you ever wondered what life was like in the Rochester area when William and Caroline Yates settled here in 1863? For starters, there were a lot fewer people. The village of Rochester counted around 500 residents, while another 1,200 people were scattered throughout the remainder of Avon Township, or lived in the village of Stony Creek. That meant a total population of just over 1,700 for the area that is occupied today by Rochester and Rochester Hills. For a bit of perspective, that's the same number of people as makes up the current student body of Rochester High School. Most of those 1,700 people belong to the farm families, with their biggest crops being wheat, corn, oats, potatoes, and wool. Because there were three fast-moving streams in the township, the Clinton River, Paint Creek, and Stony Creek, the Rochester area was a prime location for mills to process grains and wool. By the time the Yates family arrived in Avon, there were 2 woolen mills, 3 saw mills, and 4 grist mills operating in the area. The people of Avon had to be safe, reliant, because the township and its villages were relatively isolated, with a few exceptions. The roads were little more than rough wagon tracks, and a trip to Detroit and back was a multi-day excursion. The arrival of the railroad line through Rochester was still almost a decade into the future. Life in the century with no railroad or telegraph lines meant that the news of the outside world reached Rochester by mail that was delivered by stage riders. News of current events might arrive days or weeks after the fact. Since Rochester would not have its first regular newspaper until the railroad came in 1872, the Rochester Avon residents of 1863 wanted the stage to bring copies of Detroit Free Press or the Pontiac Jacksonian. We know from historical land records that a sawmill stood on what is now the Yates property as early as 1848. When William and Caroline Yates settled here, they continued the sawmill operation. But in 1774, less than a year after the railroad line came through their land and Yates Station was established, William Yates made a big change in his business. The Rochester area newspaper of March 12, 1874, reported that Mr. W. H. Yates has been taking the machinery out of his sawmill and putting in the place of it one of the celebrated challenge feed mills, which grinds any kind of grain without regard to dampness. As Avon Township closed out its pioneer settlement era and moved into its agricultural heyday with the coming of the railroad, William Yates probably saw that it was time for him to change direction in his milling business and cater to the needs of farmers. Situated as he was halfway between Rochester and Utica, he could conveniently grind grains for farmers in eastern Avon Township as well as those in western Shelby Township. Yates advertised his speed grinding services throughout the summer of 1874. But as autumn approached in that year, he made another announcement that turned out to be a historic one. On October 1st, Yates ran a new ad for cider pressing at his mill. He boasted that he had just installed a Boomer and Beauchert cider press and noted that his press could produce more cider for the amount of apples than any other now in use. Farmers could bring their apple crops to Yates for pressing, or they could purchase cider at the mill by the barrel or gallon. And with that small newspaper ad in the harvest season of 1874, a tradition was born at Yates Station that carries on this day. The Boomer and Boshirt Company, manufacturer of Yates' new cider press, was itself new to the cider business. The company was founded in 1874 in Syracuse, New York, and was located only about 15 miles west of Sullivan, the town where the Yates family had lived before coming to Michigan. Boomer and Boshirt became well known for its cider and wine presses that were installed in mills across the United States. We don't know how long William Yates used his original Boomer and Boshirt press, but we do know that the Yates family stuck with that manufacturer over years. The press that we are currently use in our mill was made by Dunning and Boshirt, the company that succeeded Boomer and Boshirt in 1915. Here at Yates, we like to stick with things that work. The fourth owner of Yates Cider Mill, Les Posey, grew up living the Yates life. Starting when he was in high school, he had a hand in nearly every aspect of the business over his 40-year tenure at the mill. From labeling bottles, giving out cider samples, and selling worm bait, to buying equipment and land to run the business. But there is one aspect in particular that Yates Cider Mill fans may really wish to thank him for: candy and caramel apples. One of my first jobs was a new venture of candied apples, he said, that became my little business. He single-handedly, or double-handedly if you will, bought the apples, sticks, sugar mix, and equipment to make the candied apples. He learned to make them so efficiently that he could dip and rotate two at a time, one in each hand. His parents, who owned the mill at the time, allowed him space inside of what was known as the Yates family former minnow house. He sewed the candy apples at the main counter during the weekends and in his own space throughout the week, and they became so popular they had to hire someone to help him. Soon, however, Les's candy apples business branched out into the world of caramel, and that happened after a suggestion from the owner of another local cider mill. I went for supplies one day for my candied apples and bumped into the manager of that mill, and he encouraged me to get into the caramel apples. So I started exploring that, Les said. Pretty soon, half of the apples he sowed were candy, and the other half were caramel. Eventually, the red apples dwindled in popularity, and it became challenging to maintain the equipment for both. The candy apples ended up falling by the wayside, but thankfully, the caramel apples remain a staple at the Yates Cider Mill of today. So yes, if you love sweet, juicy, thicky caramel apples, you have Les Posey to thank. Now that was some of the history on Yates Cider Mill. Now in this part of the video, I am going to add photos and videos that I had taken around the area of Yates Cider Mill in October of 2023.
You guys picked the right spot to hang out. I can shoot you here. That's cool.
Well, this concludes the video. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.